The Second World War was not fought only on blood-soaked beaches or shattered cities. Far from the public eye, beyond headlines and victory speeches, another war raged across the endless oceans of the world. It was a war of shadows, silence, and sudden death. Thousands of miles from land, where the horizon swallowed hope and the sea concealed danger, control of the oceans would decide the fate of nations. The Atlantic, in particular, became a vast killing ground. Merchant ships carried food, fuel, weapons, and lifelines for entire populations. Without them, Britain would starve, armies would collapse, and the war would be lost before it could be won. Long before they became submarine hunters, flying boats were born out of necessity. The vastness of the oceans demanded aircraft that could go farther, stay longer, and operate where no airfields existed. Traditional land-based planes were limited by range and infrastructure. The sea, however, offered an endless network of runways, if an aircraft could learn to land upon it. Engineers answered that challenge with designs that blurred the line between ship and airplane. Hull-shaped fuselages allowed aircraft to touch down on open water, while high-mounted wings kept engines clear of crashing waves. These machines were large, heavy, and ungainly, but they possessed one priceless advantage: endurance. Flying boats could patrol for 10, 12, even 15 hours at a time, watching empty horizons where a single enemy sighting could change the course of a convoy's fate. As the Battle of the Atlantic intensified, Allied commanders quickly realized that submarines feared aircraft more than surface warships. A destroyer could hunt a U-boat, but only if it knew where to look. Aircraft could search vast areas rapidly, forcing submarines to dive and slowing their attacks. Flying boats became the perfect solution for closing the deadly air gap, the remote stretches of ocean where convoys had previously sailed without any protection from above. Aircraft like the American PBY Catalina and the British Short Sunderland emerged as unlikely heroes of the sea war. They were not fast. They were not sleek. And they were certainly not invincible. But they carried radar, depth charges, machine guns, and crews trained to spot the smallest anomaly on the ocean's surface. A shadow where none should exist. A wake cutting across calm water. A metallic glint beneath the sun. Life aboard a flying boat was a test of endurance and discipline. Crews operated in cramped, noisy conditions, surrounded by vibrating metal and the constant smell of fuel and oil. There was no autopilot to rely on. Long before the first flying boat appeared on the horizon, the true masters of the Atlantic already ruled beneath the waves. German U-boats were not merely weapons of war, they were instruments of psychological terror. Silent, unseen, and patient, they transformed the ocean into a hunting ground where death could arrive without warning. For Allied sailors, the sea itself became an enemy, beautiful on the surface, merciless below. Life aboard a U-boat was a descent into confinement and tension. Steel walls pressed inward from every side. Narrow passageways forced men to move sideways. The air was thick with diesel fumes, sweat, oil, and unwashed bodies. Fresh water was rationed. Food spoiled quickly. Days blurred into nights as artificial light replaced the sun. There was no escape from the submarine, and no escape from one's own thoughts. Yet these cramped vessels carried enormous power. Armed with torpedoes capable of ripping open the hulls of massive cargo ships, U-boats struck with devastating efficiency. A successful attack often ended before the target even understood what had happened. Explosions shattered the sea, ships broke apart, and survivors were left clinging to debris in freezing water, while the submarine slipped silently away. German commanders perfected the art of submarine warfare. They learned to approach convoys at night, using darkness as cover. They attacked in coordinated groups known as wolf packs, overwhelming defenses through numbers and surprise. Each sinking weakened Allied supply lines, tightening the grip around Britain's throat. For a time, it seemed as though the U-boat arm might strangle the war itself. But dominance came at a cost. Beneath the waves, U-boat crews lived under constant strain. Every sound mattered. The creak of metal, the echo of propellers, the distant thump of depth charges, each noise could signal death. Silence was survival. One careless movement, one dropped tool, could betray their position to enemies above. The encounter rarely began with gunfire. More often, it started with a single moment of uncertainty. A shape where none should exist. A faint disturbance breaking the natural rhythm of the waves. High above the ocean, a flying boat crew leaned forward, eyes narrowing, instincts sharpening. After hours of emptiness, the sea had finally spoken. From the cockpit, the pilot adjusted course, careful not to give away the aircraft's presence too soon. The engines droned steadily as the flying boat descended, clouds parting to reveal a dark silhouette on the water below. A U-boat, surfaced and vulnerable, its crew unaware that death was already approaching from the sky. On the submarine's bridge, the lookout's world was limited to the horizon. Sea, sky, and wind. Then, suddenly, movement. A flash of wings. The alarm was shouted too late. Orders collided. Men scrambled. Hatches slammed shut. The deck gun was manned as the commander faced a terrible choice: dive and risk attack from above, or fight and hope to drive the aircraft away. The flying boat committed to the attack. There was no room for hesitation. Too high, and the depth charges would miss. Too low, and the aircraft would fly straight into a storm of anti-aircraft fire. The pilot leveled out, holding steady despite incoming rounds tearing through the air. Tracers streaked upward, ripping through fabric and metal, shaking the aircraft violently. Inside the flying boat, the world became noise and chaos. Gunners fired back, their weapons chattering as they raked the submarine's deck. The battle itself often lasted only minutes. But for those who lived through it, the consequences stretched far longer. Once the explosions faded and the gunfire fell silent, the ocean revealed the true cost of the encounter. Smoke drifted across the water. Oil spread in dark, shimmering patterns. And men, wounded, exhausted, and terrified, faced the reality of survival. For flying boat crews, escape did not mean safety. Aircraft limped away with shredded wings, damaged engines, and fuel leaking into the sea below. Pilots fought to keep heavy machines airborne, knowing that a single mechanical failure could force a crash landing hundreds of miles from help. Inside the aircraft, medics moved between the injured, applying bandages as the plane shook violently through turbulent skies. If a flying boat was forced to ditch, the ordeal became even more brutal. The ocean was unforgiving. Cold water drained strength in minutes. Inflatable rafts offered little protection against waves and wind. Survivors clung together, scanning the horizon for ships that might never come. Days could pass before rescue, if rescue came at all. Many crews vanished without trace, their sacrifice known only through missing patrol reports and unanswered radio calls. Beneath the surface, the fate of U-boat crews was often sealed in darkness. Damage from depth charges could warp hulls, rupture pipes, and flood compartments within seconds. Men struggled to contain leaks as water surged inward. Electrical systems failed. Air grew foul. In some cases, commanders ordered an emergency surfacing, knowing it exposed them to further attack but offered the only chance of survival. Those who escaped to the surface faced a cruel irony. The enemy aircraft was gone, but the sea remained hostile. With the submarine crippled or sinking, sailors clung to debris or life vests, surrounded by wreckage and oil. Rescue was uncertain. Allied forces sometimes took prisoners, but in the vast emptiness of the ocean. When the war finally moved on and the oceans grew quieter, the encounters between flying boats and U-boats faded quickly from public memory. There were no famous photographs, no dramatic newsreels, no crowds to witness what had happened in those vast, empty stretches of sea. And yet, these battles quietly reshaped the course of naval warfare forever. The struggle between aircraft and submarines proved a simple but revolutionary truth: no domain of war could exist in isolation. The sea was no longer safe from the sky, and the sky could no longer ignore what moved beneath the waves. Flying boats transformed the ocean into a three-dimensional battlefield, forcing submarines to adapt, retreat, and ultimately lose the advantage they once held. As Allied air patrols tightened their grip, U-boat operations became slower, riskier, and more desperate. Submarines spent more time submerged, conserving batteries and avoiding detection rather than hunting targets. This shift reduced their effectiveness and allowed Allied convoys to cross oceans with increasing confidence. What began as isolated encounters gradually turned into a system of control, one that strangled the U-boat campaign without a single decisive battle. Flying boats themselves were never celebrated as glamorous machines. They were phased out quietly as technology advanced. Long-range land-based aircraft, helicopters, and modern surveillance systems replaced them. Yet their legacy lived on in doctrine, strategy, and design. Concepts pioneered by flying boat crews, extended patrols, coordinated detection, rapid response, became the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare. For the men who fought these battles, the memories endured long after the war ended. Veterans rarely spoke of dramatic victories. Instead, they remembered exhaustion, fear, and the faces of comrades who never returned. They remembered oceans that seemed endless, skies that offered no shelter, and moments when survival depended on decisive